Corruption by P.K. Armstrong. Chapter 10. Jerry Dale sat in a corner booth in the 1019 cafe at 6 a.m., waiting for Sam Peterson, his old patrol partner. After 5 years on patrol together, Sam and he were like brothers. He knew Sam had his back, and he had Sam's back, even at the risk of injury or death. Sam was there when he was injured years ago on a hostage standoff. A distraught man held his wife and children hostage in the family car. He had talked to the man for hours and had finally got him to agree to at least let his kids get to safety. The wife, frightened of what might happen once she was alone with her armed husband, darted from the car at the same time, and her husband aimed at her fleeing back and pulled the trigger. Jerry Dale stepped in the line of fire and took a bullet through the Velcro fasteners of his bulletproof vest. The bullet did too much damage for him to return to duty, so he took his retirement and spent his days working in his shop at the back of the house. His service to the community had been rewarded. He still worked with an anger management group, and he was still known in local law enforcement circles. He probably could have made a few obvious calls to some former cops and found out about Violet's father pretty quickly. But dirty cops were bad business, and he didn't want to put anyone's career in jeopardy. Between he and Sam, they could figure out which trees to shake to get the information they needed. Jerry heard the bell on the door and looked up. Sam had made it, but he wasn't alone. With him was a formidable-looking woman, tall, with a substantial bosom, about in her late 50s. She wore a cotton print dress and a matching cardigan and carried a very large bag. Sam located him and they both walked over to the table. Jerry Dale stood to greet them. The woman cackled. Well, I haven't seen a man stand in the presence of a woman since my daddy died. Jerry assumed her amusement was because of him standing, not because her daddy died. Sam suppressed a smile and made haste to introduce them. Jerry Dale, meet Ruth Mayberry. Ruth, this is my ex-patrol partner, Jerry Dale. Ruth grasped Jerry's hand and pumped it up and down enthusiastically. I've heard a lot about you, and not just from Sam, Ruth said with an ear-to-ear grin. It's good to put a face to a name. Jerry nodded and then motioned towards a booth. I didn't expect there to be three. Is this okay, or should we get a bigger table? Ruth sat down and scooted towards the wall. I'm okay as long as Sam isn't uncomfortable with getting a little personal, she said with a little shimmy. Sam chuckled and sat down next to her. Jerry sat and motioned for the server. The server left with their orders. Neither Sam nor Jerry batted an eye when Ruth ordered a tall stack of pancakes, bacon, sausage, and country potatoes. I'm a big girl. I need my calories, she said apologetically. Jerry sat back against a plastic seat and gave Sam a look. He took the hint. Look, I know you weren't expecting both of us, but as soon as you told me why you needed to meet, the first person I thought of was Ruth. I didn't tell you because I wanted to make sure she was willing to help us. She agreed, so I brought her along. Why? Jerry asked pointedly. Ruth answered. Because I was the secretary to Captain Gwen Johnson and the Corruption Task Force. The server dropped off their food and provided Ruth with her necessary accompaniments, ketchup, horseradish, hot sauce, and red pepper, and by unspoken agreement they kept the conversation casual, mainly the unreasonably warm weather, the new retail and median-income housing development Ruth was for, and the new coffee and wine bars that had popped up downtown. Ruth was definitely against. The talk didn't turn until the cafe was empty of the breakfast crowd, and they had finished, except for coffee. None of that green tea for Ruth. Jerry trusted anyone Sam trusted, so he didn't hesitate. Were you with the task force from its initiation? Yes. Captain Johnson brought me in before bringing anyone else on so I could facilitate furnishing the space, buying supplies, and completing the hiring paperwork. How was she to work for? I liked working for her, but I felt that sometimes she fell into that trap that any woman in law enforcement can fall into if they aren't careful. Trying to please the male hierarchy. It is hard for a woman in law enforcement or any male-dominated field. Sometimes I think she went against what she felt was good and right because she was afraid they would kick her back down the ladder. Jerry nodded. He remembered having a similar conversation with Angel after she graduated from the police academy. He paused and thought Ruth's words were a preface for what she was about to reveal. You know why I asked Sam to come here? Yes. Ruth put down her cup and Sam filled it with more coffee and prompted Ruth. Tell him about one of their main targets. Ruth took a sip of the brew and began. There was a problem with some of the local Leos. Even non-sworn personnel often fell into the habit of using the lingo. Ruth continued. It spread across 3 agencies, a police department detective, sheriff's deputy, and even a fire inspector. They pooled their resources and those of several employees across the different agencies and opened an auto repair shop. After receiving complaints, an employee of the shop turned informant, and it was discovered that they were using their government contacts to purchase parts at a reduced price, inflating that price on customer invoices, and then charging their customers 20% more than the inflated price. That was stupid, Jerry replied. Easy case to prove. Yes, but that is not all. The floodgates were now really open. It seems some higher-end vehicles were confiscated during the course of drug, theft, and prostitution investigations. The vehicles were somehow redirected from police and sheriff impound lots to the auto shop, carted out, and sold on the black market. Jerry let out a slow whistle. That requires manipulation of a lot of official paperwork. Thus, the task force was formed. It was entrusted with finding out how it was being done, who was involved, following the paper trail, and presenting an airtight case for prosecution. Sam set his coffee cup down and started rubbing his chin, a sign he was thinking. Wait, the law enforcement community is pretty small, and gossip spreads. Why didn't we hear anything about this? Jerry could sense Sam's growing frustration. Sam no longer worked for the police department. 5 years ago, he was headhunted by the Attorney General's office that formed a commission made up of retired law enforcement officers, judges, civil rights attorneys, and university professors. This commission was formed to monitor corruption in public service in the entire state. The commission had powers to investigate, including issuing subpoenas and arrest warrants. It was so successful that other states had contacted the Attorney General's office requesting assistance in forming their own commissions. One of the major goals was to stop the violation of civil rights and abuses of power before they resulted in the dissolution of communities into protests and riots. The commission often used the results of their investigations to write legislation or change existing laws. Jerry looked at Sam and then back to Ruth. So why didn't the commission hear about the investigation? They didn't want the commission to know. Not all law enforcement is excited about what the commission does. She looked at Sam and he nodded in agreement. They feel that the commission is biased against law enforcement. Is there more coffee? Jerry motioned to the server for fresh coffee, and while they waited, thought about the questions he wanted to ask. After he poured for them all, he started again on Gwen Johnson. So did the captain agree with keeping it from the commission? Ruth began shaking her head before Jerry finished the question. That's what I mean. I think she wanted to bring the commission in on it because, as she stated, it would triple the task force's resources, but she was pressured to keep it quiet. Sam weighed in. Once an issue has shown up on the commission's radar, it is generally implied that the problem existed for some time and local law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't investigate properly. Of course, when we make announcements to the press, we never say that. We have often made statements to the effect that the problem was discovered by an agency and that agency has requested the commission's help to investigate. Ruth nodded. The captain was told in no uncertain terms that she was to suppress knowledge of the task force and the investigation. In the end, they were able to close the auto shop. Those who had just invested funds were cleared of knowledge of the fraud and theft and were issued official warnings in their personnel files. But there were 3 deputies they were unable to file charges against. She looked directly at Jerry. And one is the one you will be wanting to know about. Jerry and Sam glanced at one another, and it was Sam who spoke. Ruth, are you sure you are okay with this? I know Jerry only has one use for the information, but I have to tell you, if I find there is enough to bring before the commission, I will likely use it, and that would mean eventually you would be subpoenaed to testify. Ruth thought for a minute, twirling a lock of hair that had fallen out of its pins. She sipped her coffee and shook her head when Sam motioned to pour her more. Eventually, she spoke. I met the officer in question, and frankly, he was being used by someone higher up and smarter. The captain knew it, and we had a case and our witness. In the end, the witness disappeared, and later we found out why. Cindy Mailer, the witness who worked at the auto shop, was in a relationship with the deputy, and he was the father of her baby girl. She deliberately withheld his name from the task force because she didn't want him to get in trouble. She later fled, leaving her baby with her roommate. Sam thought for a minute. That would have weakened the strength of the witness testimony, which is another reason they didn't want the commission involved. The deputy was a bit of a golden boy for the sheriff's office, the sheriff in particular. They didn't want to have to come up with explanations. So since the main auto theft ring was broken up and the important players involved disciplined, they decided to let the issue drop. Why didn't she take her baby with her? Jerry wondered out loud. I'm not sure, but when the roommate was questioned, she ended up fleeing too. I think we all assumed that she later hooked up with Cindy and returned her kid. They never issued an alert out for the child? Sam was stunned and looked at Jerry to confirm his disgust. They spoke for a little while longer, and Ruth assured both of them if they had more questions, she was more than willing to answer them. Sam walked Ruth to her car and then, reassuring Jerry he would keep him posted, left himself. Jerry got into his truck and sat for a moment. He didn't notice that traffic on the main street where the cafe was located had picked up, nor did he notice the cafe's lunch crowd beginning to form. He didn't like where this was going, and not just because of the corruption. It was the personal connection. After Ruth had given him the name of the deputy, he grew silent. Sam began to say something to him, but he had imperceptibly shaken his head to stop him from speaking. The name Ruth gave him made this personal, because Stan Granger, the corrupt sheriff's deputy, was Detective Christopher Roland's ex-partner. It was rare for a partner not to know the man they worked with, faced death with, spent more time with than their families, was dirty. Although Angel had not talked about adopting Violet and making her a permanent part of their family, she had become family nonetheless. It worried him that their searching could cause Angel and Violet pain. He shook himself and smiled. Francine was right. Angel was a strong woman. She was a good investigator, better than him if he was honest. She had an innate way of piecing together fragments of a case and coming out with the truth. She had taken down some serious perpetrators as a cop and done her fair share of ferreting out justice as a private investigator. Together, the family could handle whatever was coming. Jerry Dale started the ignition and pulled out of the cafe parking lot. He would do what it took to protect his girls.